Our next speaker is Amanda Douberley. Amanda is lecturer in the Department of Art History, Theory and Criticism at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Her research has been supported by fellowships from the Smithsonian American Art Museum National Portrait Gallery, the Henry Luce Foundation ACLS, and the Menil Collection. Amanda's paper is entitled Bulldozer Aesthetics, Alexander Calder and Robert Morris in Grand Rapids, Michigan.
So thank you, Alex, and thanks also to Alex and Ellen for, again, organizing this really interesting conference. So on June 29th, 1967, the Wall Street Journal ran an advertisement sponsored by the Grand Rapids Chamber of Commerce that showed off the city's downtown urban renewal project. Under the headline, "Hey Grand Rapids, your progress is showing," an aerial photograph surveys the buildings then rising from the 40-acre renewal area. The dense 19th century street grid, along with hundreds of brick buildings, had been bulldozed to make way for modern urban forms, superblocks, plazas, and office towers. New highways circumscribe downtown Grand Rapids, crisscrossing the river for which the city is named. Roads stand ready to carry an anticipated influx of white-collar workers from their homes in new suburbs to the office buildings under construction in Vandenberg Center, named for a prominent Michigan senator. Though the extent of destruction in Grand Rapids may seem extreme, it was part of a federal program that sponsored similar projects of city rebuilding throughout the United States during the 1950s and 1960s. Urban renewal's legacy is complex. Initially established in 1949 as a program to rehabilitate so-called slums, renewal has become notorious for destroying neighborhoods, for reinforcing racial segregation and discrimination, and for replacing mixed-use buildings and vibrant street life with monotonous functionalist projects that seemed utterly foreign to their inhabitants. And on the screen I'm showing you Pruitt-Igoe, probably the most notorious projects in the United States. Urban renewal, yet amendments to the federal urban renewal law in 1959 and 1961 gave cities greater leeway in using renewal funds for other types of projects. This led to another legacy, the construction of new government and civic centers, glittering downtown showpieces that were meant to boost tax revenue and symbolized the wealth, excitement, and opportunity of urban life. So on the screen, Boston City Hall, one such project. As the Wall Street Journal advertisement attests, proponents of urban renewal were intent on remaking the urban fabric, and in the process, renewing the image of the city in the minds of both local and national audiences. Formerly known as Furniture City, through urban renewal, boosters hope to transform Grand Rapids from a center for the manufacture of furniture, which had moved to the American South beginning in the 1930s, into a hub for regional and corporate headquarters and a new white-collar economy. Today I want to look at the role played by public art in Grand Rapids' urban renewal project. The same month that the Grand Rapids Chamber of Commerce praised the city's progress in the Wall Street Journal, the National Council on the Arts, hereafter the NCA, awarded Grand Rapids its first matching grant for the Sculpture Project, later renamed the Art in Public Places Program. The program was established to insert significant works of art into major civic spaces across the United States and began as an award recognizing distinguished achievement in visual arts with commissions for public art. Eventually, the program would fund 2 sculptures in Grand Rapids that are the subject of my talk today, and certainly there's more than just these 2 located in the city. Alexander Calder's Le Grand Vitesse, dedicated in 1969, and Robert Morris's Grand Rapids Project, dedicated in 1974. As we will see, both of these sculptures were, in a sense, engendered by urban renewal. Taken as case studies, they help me to consider a fundamental shift in attitudes regarding art destruction and renewal at a turning point in the history of public sculpture in the United States. Indeed, just as renewal was remaking the image of the city, artists were reimagining the public monument. During the 1960s, many artists were testing the limits of sculpture as a medium for making art, from minimalist objects at the beginning of the decade to site-specific earthworks at its end. For the artist critics and art historians writing about this new work, the monument became a key critical term for relating contemporary art to the longer history of sculpture. Take, for example, Rosalind Krauss's important essay, Sculpture in the Expanded Field. In this 1979 text, Krauss attempts to account for the variety of objects that were called sculpture during the late 1960s and 1970s, a category that had been stretched so thin it was in danger of collapsing. She writes, quote, "And so we stare at the pit in the earth and think we both do and don't know what sculpture is," end quote. Krauss, however, knows exactly what sculpture is, a historically bounded category with its own rules and internal logic. And this logic, Krauss argues, is, she says, inseparable from the logic of the monument. By definition, a sculpture is a commemorative representation. It sits in a particular place and speaks about the meaning or use of that place. Sculpture is figurative and vertical, with a pedestal that mediates between actual site and representational sign. Krauss argues that this model began to break down during the 19th century with the failure of two of Rodin's commissions, his Gates of Hell and Balzac. No version of either sculpture exists at its originally intended site, although multiple versions of both can be found in museums around the world. With Rodin and the subsequent unfolding of modernism, sculpture would negate the monument. To paraphrase Krauss, instead of figurative, it is abstract. Rather than the pedestal mediating between site and sign, the sculpture is pure base, functionally placeless, and largely self-referential. According to Krauss, this nomadic, homeless sort of sculpture, epitomized for her in the work of Constantin Brancusi, had become, by the early 1960s, what was on or in front of the building that was not the building, or what was in the landscape that was not the landscape. And for Krauss, the purest examples of the latter two are the two works by Robert Morris. So in planning the sculpture project, the NCA would challenge the logic of the monument in two important ways. First, the NCA explicitly forbade the use of the grant for commemorative sculpture of any sort. Rather than a sculptural monument that spoke about the past, the NCA simply wanted to introduce monumental sculpture by the best contemporary artists into the urban environment. As René Darnencourt, who was largely responsible for initiating the sculpture project, complained, quote, "In the United States, works of art displayed in public spaces are almost all reminiscent of 1875. If we can establish the fact that contemporary art is something that fits in with contemporary life, I think this in itself is a very important thing," end quote. The second challenge to the logic of the monument had to do with the essential relationship between the monument and its site. This relationship was complicated for the sculpture project by urban renewal, which altered the idea that sculpture would draw on the history of a particular place for its meaning. The assumption of spatial continuity between past and present was quite literally wiped away by the bulldozer. Superblocks rendered past urban forms unrecognizable by erasing entire streets and remaking the city at a totally new scale. At the same time, such new construction created many potential sites for the large-scale sculpture promoted by the NCA. That Grand Rapids was even considered for the sculpture project resulted from little more than propitious timing. On April 7th, 1967, Henry Geldzahler, Associate Curator of American Painting and Sculpture at the Metropolitan Museum of Art and coordinator of the NEA's Visual Arts program, lectured at the Grand Rapids Art Museum. While touring the city with his hostess, Nancy Molnix, Geldzahler suggested that Grand Rapids apply for a grant to fund a sculpture for Vandenberg Center. More specifically, a sculpture for the large plaza in front of the new City Hall, which provided a clean slate for a civic symbol that would encapsulate the changes taking hold in the city. Indeed, Grand Rapids is somewhat exceptional in that the city's urban renewal area included not only a rundown mercantile strip and Würzburg's department store relocated to a different part of town in 1951, but also all of its civic buildings. When renewal boosters were lobbying Grand Rapids citizens to vote to tax themselves and fund new construction for Vandenberg Center, stories ran in the local newspaper underscoring the need for demolition and rebuilding of these civic structures in no uncertain terms. The picturesque old courthouse is labeled antiquated. The police headquarters, a cause for local pride when it opened, according to the article, is now decrepit, and City Hall outdated. Another news item proclaims, quote, "Time has run out on our present buildings, built 75 years ago. Our county courthouse, the City Hall, and police headquarters are run down, inefficient, and expensive to maintain. They are located in a renewal area and must be torn down," end quote. In his study of urban renewal, which is very excellent, Samuel Zip explains the sense of urgency that underscores these statements. Quote, "Proponents of urban renewal assumed that its built environment, its cleared open superblocks and austere towers was a self-evident symbol of a new kind of time and space. These built forms stood for the very idea that it was necessary and possible to do away with the old city, for the faith that tradition had to be displaced, for the belief that city building had to reveal time rolling ever forward, leaving outmoded ways of life behind," end quote. The architecture firm Skidmore, Owings & Merrill won the contract to design the new city and county buildings in partnership with a local firm. As built, Grand Rapids' new civic buildings are diminutive versions of SOM's corporate office towers. Like all of the firm's designs for corporations, including buildings such as Lever House in New York City, these civic buildings resulted from SOM's study of the city administration's space needs, workflow, and office organization, a process of particular importance to Grand Rapids, since many departments that had been crowded out of older buildings and scattered throughout the city could now be united under one roof. Grand Rapids' Gothic Revival City Hall had looked to past architectural traditions to convey a sense of permanence and monumentality. SOM's design proclaimed Grand Rapids city government to be as rational, functional, and efficient as any business. The plaza took the place of the old City Hall's clock tower as the new building's main feature. Here, the architects intended to build a fountain, which would offset the building and act as a focal point for the plaza. The plans for a fountain were scrapped with the announcement of the sculpture project grant. Due to time constraints, I won't go into the details of Calder winning the commission. Suffice it to say that as one of the most famous artists in the United States with an international reputation for his abstract sculptures, he was an obvious choice for a program intended in part as an award for artistic achievement. Instead, I want to think about the ways in which renewal shaped how the sculpture operated following its installation. Whereas the monument draws its meaning from the historical ground of the past, La Grande Vitesse became a marker in a new spatial ordering of the city wrought by urban renewal. Gone was the 19th century street grid, along with Grand Rapids' old mercantile strip, and more importantly, its civic buildings. The superblocks that rose in their place were built at an entirely new scale, which allowed for the construction of large, freestanding, modern office buildings interspersed among green space, parking lots, and plazas. Le Grand Vitesse matched both the superblock's scale and the abstraction of tower and plaza. On the ground, it identified City Hall to pedestrians and became a place marker for the renewed Civic Center. This reordering encompassed not only the plaza, however, which served as a cleared slate for a new civic symbol, but also the image of the city as represented through public relations. Le Grand Vitesse, which translates as Grand Rapids in Calderized French, came to epitomize the aspirations of Grand Rapids civic officials, businessmen, and citizens for a renewed downtown, one that would both retain companies and draw new businesses to the area, thus ensuring the city's prosperity. The sculpture even came to stand for the city itself as a kind of logo or trademark. Sometime after the dedication of Le Grand Vitesse in June 1969, Grand Rapids cemented its identification with Vandenberg Center by adopting a graphic image that represented the new City Hall and sculpture as its official logo. The symbol was eventually simplified to feature just the sculpture and appeared on everything from taxi cabs to the city's garbage trucks. Grand Rapids' identification with Le Grand Vitesse reflected civic pride in the sculpture, which had distinguished the city on the national stage. Yet the sculpture's abstraction lent itself to adaptation as a logo, which made it legible to a wide public. Just as the old City Hall's clock tower had told the hour, now an image of Le Grand Vitesse circulated throughout the city, and similarly declared the unifying power of civic government. Robert Morris's Grand Rapids project, dedicated just 5 years later, represents a significant departure from Calder's Le Grand Vitesse in that it works against such mediation. Morris first proposed the work as part of Sculpture Off the Pedestal, an outdoor exhibition held in Grand Rapids in 1973. The Women's Committee of the Grand Rapids Art Museum sponsored the show, which featured 12 sculptures sited around Vandenberg Center. The exhibition's 13th sculpture, Morris's Grand Rapids project, was represented in the catalog with a drawing and then built the following year with a grant from the Art and Public Places program. Rather than a site in Vandenberg Center, Morris proposed Grand Rapids project for Belknap Park, a hill and popular lookout point that's visible from many sites around the city. And in this photo, you can see Vandenberg Center in the background. Parts of the hill slope had been removed to provide infill for the highway constructed through Grand Rapids in the early 1960s. Morris's project stabilized the hill and connected the hilltop with a recreation area at its base through the construction of 4 ramps. The ramps intersect at a secondary viewing platform midway down the hill, inscribing a dramatic X shape in the landscape. Whereas the Calder sculpture crowned the city's urban renewal project, Morris's earthwork reclaimed a site that had been marred by urban development. Dedicated just 5 years apart, these two works represent utterly different attitudes regarding the relationship between sculpture and the environment. Le Grand Vitesse marks its site, identifying the building behind it as well as Vandenberg Center. The sculpture's scale and abstraction match the surrounding architecture and the renewal project that led to its erection. And to pedestrians or even motorists on Ottawa Avenue, Le Grand Vitesse dominates the plaza and draws spectators in with its dynamic form, just sort of represented by this kind of walk around the sculpture. You can see it looks really different from different perspectives. Le Grand Vitesse marks, let me see, lost my spot. Well, Grand Rapids project is also quite large. It too is abstract and draws attention to its site in a very literal way. X marks the spot. And I don't want to be accused of brushing over possible allusions to Catholicism in 1960s art. So I want to point out that the patron saint of Grand Rapids, St. Andrew, was crucified on an X-shaped cross. So whether Morris intended this connection will perhaps be clarified through further research. So however, Morris's work demonstrates a different attitude towards monumentality from Calder. It's not an object imposed on the landscape, but a shaping of the earth itself. Rather than crowning the aesthetics of bulldozer renewal, Morris used the bulldozer to enhance a recreational area and to restore an eroded hillside. So in a 1979 essay, Morris discusses the work of artists making earthworks and site constructions, including himself, in the terms laid out by Krauss. In place of the monument's classical allusions, Morris sees this newer work as having, quote, a new motive and internal structure, that is, the thematic as a contextual response, end quote. He continues, the thematic in the work I have mentioned is not commemorative of great events or people, neither is it narrative in the illustrative sense. Rather, it is commemorative of one or another of the various aspects of the site itself. I'm using the term to designate this referential aspect, the many things about the work which do not exhaust themselves in purely formal terms, end quote. So what are the aspects of site commemorated by Grand Rapids Project? On the one hand, we can look to the highway project that in a sense generated the work by fulfilling Morris's desire to intervene in a disturbed site. Similar to the dialectical thinking of Robert Smithson, Morris does not aim to mediate ecology and industry simply by covering up the latter. Unlike, say, Alan Sonfist, whose time landscapes of the same period sought to renew the city's natural environment by returning the landscape to its pre-colonial state with carefully selected plantings. So Morris eschews the pastoral, nor does he want to create an artificial landscape at the other extreme, like Vandenberg Center. Instead, Grand Rapids Project retains a sense of the industrial through its paved paths, which also refer to the highway that disrupted the site, while at the same time becoming a space of leisure. Some of the activities to be performed on the hill are outlined by Morris in a concrete poem, published in the catalog produced for the work. Climbings, descendings, walkings, runnings, crawlings, rollings, sightings, viewings, and so on. Another aspect of the work highlighted in the poem is that Morris sees it as an intersection of spectators and the site. The left side of the X indicates the activities of people, while the right side seems to refer more to the earth. Risings, fallings, thawings, freezings, drainings, erodings, settlings, shiftings, etc. The fact that these gerunds are plural could allude to multiple spectators, repeated visits, and the passage of time, as the land freezes and thaws, drains and erodes, settles and shifts, and people interact with the site via the work. Like a public works project, which Morris seems to mimic through the signature affixed to the ground midway down the hill, the sculpture becomes invisible. Indeed, Grand Rapids Project is very hard to see when one is on the hill using the sculpture. With Grand Rapids Project, we might say that Morris has not only changed the terms of commemorative sculpture, but also urban renewal. The word recreation comes from recreare, create again, renew. So if downtown Grand Rapids was bulldozed or unbuilt, only to be rebuilt or renewed, recreated, Morris has used the bulldozer to different ends. For him, recreation is not the goal, but recreation.